autonomy, agency. What does living life to its fullest potential, but also being a Christian, a believer, look like in 2025?
So my whole ministry is built on the theological foundation of the greatest commandment, right? When I went to seminary and had all of these holes poked in my embedded theology, all of these things that I believe were true, only to discover like, oh, it's actually not like that. You know, I went through all of that. I think it was Mark Twain that said, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And I went through that in seminary and started thinking about like, okay, I thought I knew a bunch of stuff that I really don't know. And now I'm, you know, coming into a deeper understanding. So what does that look like in practical terms as it applies to how I live out my faith? And I knew I could not continue to practice the basic components of the theology that I was given. And I started, you know, looking in the Bible because I was a seminary student. I was like, is there anything else in here redemptive? Like, can I redeem, you know, the spirituality that I've built over these past 20 something years of my life? And I landed on the greatest commandment in Matthew chapter 22, where an attorney asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in all of the law? And Jesus said, love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Then he says, everything in the law and everything in the prophets hinges on these two. So love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself come as a package deal. Everything hinges on those two. And as I started to really unpack that, because I was like, okay, if we supposed to be like Jesus and we supposed to follow his way, he's saying this is the most important thing. This is what he said. He said, love God. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. That is a package deal. One is not more important than the other. Love God is not more important than love your neighbor as yourself. Because that word like, the second part is like it. That word in the original language of the New Testament, it means of equal rank. So he's saying love God, and of equal rank, love your neighbor as yourself. So you can't love God if you don't love your neighbor. And you can't love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. And when I realized that love your neighbor as yourself, the as yourself part was the part that we never talked about growing up. Nobody ever said it's important for you to love yourself. God wants you to love yourself. That's the greatest commandment in the faith. You can't live for God if you don't love yourself. Nobody ever told me that. So when I saw that sitting there staring me in the face, I was like, well, then I need to start really digging into what it means for me to love myself. And that's what I help people do. And that's what I think it means to live an abundant life in 2025 and still honor your moral compass and what you believe about God and what you believe about the world, is that you learn how to love yourself. It was the great Howard Thurman that said, don't ask yourself, what does the world need? But ask yourself, what makes you come alive? So yeah, it's creepy.
We gonna be the uncles and aunties.
For real, I do it all the time now.
Natural intro, y'all. Pastor Kristian A. Smith, man, how you feeling? Back for a part 2, bro. Part 1, you had Fundamentalist Very Uncomfortable, which is what we love, sparking conversation. How you feeling, though, brother?
Man, I'm great. You know, things are, you know, moving in the right direction for me personally, but I'm always trying to balance that with what's going on in the world. So, you know, it's tough. It's tough because like ministry is growing and people's needs are being met and we're hitting goals internally as a community. But like, then I turn on my phone and go to Instagram and
Foolishness.
boom, another bomb drops in Gaza on a
Right.
tent. It's like, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel that, man. The black old man. You know, hearing you talk about that before we got started, I busted out laughing because I already knew exactly where you were going to go with that. For all the viewers, man, who's tuned in, who and what does the black old man often represent in the black community for us?
Yeah, like we were talking about it in terms of how like old black men are stubborn, don't want to change their outlook, don't want to question their biases. So, you know, when I'm having conversations with people that I'm in relationship with, and like, you know, an old black man does something that make us kind of like roll our eyes in the back of our head, like, oh, here we go with this shit again.
Yeah.
It's like, that's an old black man thing. So I always think to myself, like, I hope I don't become that when I get older, where I'm closed off to learning new ways to experience the world and see the world. Because I see it all the time with millennials, and I see my peers judging college students the way the old heads used to judge us. And I'm like, what are y'all doing?
Man.
Like, we already been down this path before. Why would you want to repeat the same cycles?
Yeah.
So yeah, old black man. I'm gonna be one day. I just hope not that. I hope to be one day, and I hope to not be it like that.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Hearing that, man, instantly I think about in the church, right? We have this rift sometimes between, and just in our overall black community, between the older generation and the younger generation. How can we try to build and bridge those gaps and try to do that in a safe church environment where we have the older generation not always critiquing, condemning, younger folks not saying, oh, I ain't trying to hear all that. How do we try to mend those relationships?
Yeah, you have to be very, like, you know, at a local level, you have to put structures in place to nurture those relationships.
Yeah.
So at one point, I put together this whole concept for a college ministry program at a church I used to go to way back in the day. And I had a concept in there for like college students to have an elder person in the church that like you connect them with, just to be able to like share resources.
Yeah.
So the elder members of the church could volunteer if they wanted to be a part of this, and they would, like, you know, share wisdom, resources with the young person, and then the young person could assist them with their tech. You see what I'm saying?
Right,
Because you know, the older we get, the more we struggle with tech.
Yeah.
So by creating reciprocal relationships, we can build, you know, more bridges across generations by understanding we have stuff to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, stop looking down on each other, but understand we got stuff to learn from each other.
Very simple. Sinners, it was a very great film, and I saw it, mind blown. You had told me, you know, you saw it as well. As a black pastor, going to see it again. Hey, I'm right there with you. Deep Southern roots. How did you feel from seeing that film, Sinners? What were your thoughts from a pastoral perspective, theologian? What did you see in the film?
Man, where do you start?
I know.
I mean, just out the gate, my dad is from the Mississippi Delta. So I always notice how these period pieces where there's a lot of racism are set in the Mississippi Delta, which confirms why my dad would always say, son, Mississippi is a great place to be from. He would always say that. Because, you know, he was born in the Mississippi Delta in the 40s. So, you know, just that piece of history right there, like, I'm one generation removed from that.
Wow.
You know, like, we talk about that level of racism as if it's so long ago in the past. My dad was born into that. And then what I loved about the film theologically was how it allowed for so many components of Black spirituality and indigenous spirituality in a more expanded term, like how it allowed for them to coexist in the same space.
Yeah.
Which is what I think Black Christians struggle with the most, is the coexistence. Like, No one is saying you can't practice your Christianity. The problem is when you think your Christianity should take precedent over everybody else's spiritual practices. But in Sinners, we saw this coexistence and this collaboration that was really powerful to me. And then what we talked about, like even before the camera started, with that one scene where, you know, spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen it,
hey, you need to hurry up and see it.
Right, you need to hurry up and see it. But this is gonna be like a little spoiler alert where it was Smoke and his love interest. I can't remember her name, but she was the hoodoo lady, right? And he was talking about all the things he had experienced, and she said to him, like, how did you know it wasn't my prayers that kept you and your brother safe while y'all were gone? My prayers, my hoodoo work, my root work that didn't keep y'all alive. She's like, you still got your mojo bag, right? So there was this mystery. She's like, how did you know it wasn't that? Right? Because it very well could have been, right? So there's a mystery there. And he can't say that it wasn't the root work that she did. He can't say that it wasn't the mojo bag that she gave him. Yeah. But then he turned around and said, yeah, that's cool, but why didn't that work for our son? And then she said, I don't know. Wow. There's an acknowledgement of the uncertainty of spirituality, the mystery of spirituality, that everything can't be wrapped up with a pretty bow of certainty, and everything is not absolute. But that's what fundamentalism wants us to embrace, that everything has to be absolute certain. We're right, everybody else is wrong. You can't have no doubt. You got to be 100% sure. That's not how this works. That's just a facade that's created to control how people see the world and how people move.
Wow. Come on, Pastor. Hey, you already starting off hot per usual. Another thing in the film, hopefully for all the people who have seen it, with the white pastor, or not the white pastor, but the white vampire, rather, seeing him outside leading all of the black people that had already been bitten. What did you take from that, from seeing him lead them and then also say the Lord's Prayer as well?
Well, we talked about it a little bit before the camera came on again.
Yeah, look, conversations before the episode, y'all, and we got to start filming those too.
For real. Like the piece that just hit me when I got here was something you said, where the vampire was like, you know, you come out here, let us bite you, then we can just all be out here together. You know, we'll just all be the same. We'll just all move the same, all act the same, all get in line, do everything the same. Which to me was a reflection of color blindness. Right? We don't see color out here. Everybody's just a vampire.
Wow.
Everybody out here is under the spell. So we don't see color out here. But on the inside of the juke joint, you had different ethnicities represented, and they were able to hold on to their culture. They were able to hold on to their heritage instead of having to deny their heritage to get along with everybody outside who was just walking around under a spell. So I don't know if that was the intent behind that, but just hearing what you said earlier, it just like registered just out of nowhere. And what was the second part you asked me?
The Lord's Prayer.
Oh,
that was
Lord's
crazy.
Prayer.
In the water too.
Yes.
Trying to baptize him. Yeah. Yes. He kept dumping them.
The Lord's Prayer. Yeah. It's like when Sammy started saying the Lord's Prayer, and then the vampire started saying it with him, that was so layered, because for those of us who were not exposed to Christianity in West Africa, which is more than likely most of us, we were introduced to Christianity on a plantation or in a slave ship or something. Like that's how it was introduced to us by white people who were subjugating us into lifelong torture and slavery, and they gave us religion along with that, right? So when Sammy started saying the Lord's Prayer, and the white demon starts saying it with him, I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Because we're praying to the same God.
Come on.
And then at the same time, even the white guy was Irish, and the Irish were given Christianity through occupation in their homeland. So it's like he's perpetuating the harm that was done to him, right? So the Irish man is perpetuating onto the black man the harm that was done to him by his oppressors. And then what happens in the black community is we start oppressing each other using the same tools that the white person oppressed us with. So then we start oppressing women, and we oppressing queer people, and we oppressing disabled people in our own communities. So it's like, when do we break that cycle? So yeah, the movie takes you in so many different directions.
Y'all, Pastor Kristian, he's cooking, y'all. He's cooking. Under a Spell. I think about our people now. Do you feel like most Black Christians, fundamentalists, are under a spell right now? What are your thoughts on that?
A lot are, and it's scary, especially this segment of Black Christianity that sees pro-Blackness as some form of idolatry. That's like the most concerning part. And I say that because it's not everybody. Like, I know some of the most pro-Black Christians, like pro-Black people who are Christians. Like that's a real thing. But like these people who think that if you identify with Jesus having dark skin like a black man, that somehow that makes your skin color an idol. And I just wish we would come from under the spell of self-loathing. And I love what Ibram X. Kendi said. The only thing wrong with Black people is that we think something is wrong with Black people. That's the only thing wrong with us, is that we think something is wrong with us. We think something is wrong with being Black. And if we could come from under that spell, man, we would be unstoppable. But there's a large portion of Black Christianity that is fully tied into a theology of anti-Blackness. And it's really unfortunate.
Indeed it is, brother. How did you feel? And I already know everybody was blowing you up. When I first saw the clip, I was like, has Pastor Kristian seen this yet? Philip Anthony Mitchell, pastor at 2819 Church, speaking on respecting authority. And from seeing that from my own personal stance, I'm like, bro, this sounds like slave talk. Like, how do you blame a victim for being murdered or being mishandled in that moment and saying it's because we don't respect authority? But it's like if Black people didn't respect quote unquote authority, that's what we've had to do all life. Or our people in the 40s and the 30s, to your point, couldn't even stare in a white woman's eyes. They had to put their head down, or they had to get off the sidewalk. Emmett Till, he had a stutter and he would whistle so he could get through sentences, and he was killed for that. So us respecting authority, if that wasn't true, then we wouldn't even be here right now standing. But also we do fight back as well. So how did you feel from hearing that and from seeing that as well?
Yeah, so I just dropped a whole podcast episode about this.
Holy smokes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's important. I also just did an interview with Ebony Jasmine Harris on her new podcast. I'm going to say something controversial. So we talked about this topic of the Black church as a plantation. Right. And I was just bringing some of my insight to that conversation. And I think it's important for us to understand our own history. That's why books about our history are being banned. Because when we know our history, we act accordingly. We understand where we come from, what we've overcome, what we've had to deal with, how we encountered certain ideas as a people. Like, it starts to make more sense how we got to where we are. So when I talk about this like slave-like theology, my friend Stephen Thurston calls it slavey theology. The theology that we were given on the plantation. And that theology was reinforced on the plantation by plantation preachers who were hired, enlisted by Massa. So Massa put them in place to preach to the other slaves what the Bible says about how you need to obey your masters. Slaves, be obedient to your masters. And if you suffer long enough here, your reward is in heaven. That is why really early on in gospel music, our music was obsessed with heaven. We sang about heaven all the time, right? It's baked into the theology. So that is where a lot of us were introduced to Christianity, on the plantation preacher telling us to slaves, obey your master, or no matter what happens, submit to the governing authorities. That is the message that Philip Anthony Mitchell preached to his church on Palm Sunday. He preached the same message to his church, his flock of hundreds of thousands of Black people. He told them what the plantation preacher used to tell the slaves on the plantation to keep them obedient to master so that they could make master's money and then go to heaven when they die. At what point do we commit as a people to break that cycle? When do we make that commitment? Because you don't have to abandon Jesus to break that cycle. And I know that a lot of people have like completely walked away from the faith, and I don't blame you. I help people walk away from the faith. I don't even personally identify as a Christian right now. I'm very, very much connected to the way of Jesus though. And I feel like that's different from what Christianity has become. But like, regardless of whether we're going to ascribe to the name of Jesus, Christianity or not, how do we break that cycle of thinking that we're only supposed to live well in heaven? When do we get to live well here? When is that our message? And that's the problem.
Wow. Why is it so hard for Christians now, especially Black Christians, to truly understand that Jesus was a revolutionary? That's why he was put on the cross, and not this person who was docile, going with the flow, quote unquote, respecting authority. Why is that so hard for Black Christians to truly understand?
Well, a lot of Black Christians don't read the Bible. Yeah. Most church folk are going off of what their pastor told them about the Bible, or these days what their favorite influencers are telling them about the Bible. So most people aren't actually reading the Bible, number one. Wow. Because if you just like stop and read Jesus's ministry, like just read Jesus's story, and you see the stuff that he reinforces and emphasizes throughout his story, it starts to make sense. He's a little bit different from the way fundamentalism has packaged him, right? But we don't really understand the Bible. We are given our doctrine before we ever read the Bible for ourselves. Wow. Our doctrine is established. And we are taught as Christians before we ever read the Bible that the Bible is beyond question. Yeah. It's beyond critique. So that shapes how you read it when you actually read it, if you do. So a lot of people have gotten their idea of Christianity through a doctrine that was created by a particular community with a particular agenda. So yeah, it's really hard to engage the fact that Jesus was a revolutionary when you just thought Jesus was all about purity and holiness. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, whatever your version of personal piety is, you don't smoke, drink, cuss, and you don't have sex, and you're not gay or queer in any way, and you go to church on Sunday and you pray. So that makes you a good person. Like, that's so shallow.
Yeah, indeed. Christian influencers, what are your thoughts on that group of people right now? Is that somewhat dangerous to have people that's spewing certain types of rhetoric and there might not be facts behind it, or, they're telling you to pull up at this church on Sunday? How do you feel just about that space right now of Christian influencing?
I hate it.
Mm,
I
yeah,
hate it so much.
yeah.
And I hate even the fact that, like, I'm included in that. You know what I'm saying?
And they try to throw you in there?
Oh, God. Because, people draw their own conclusions about me. And I can't control that. I'm too far out there.
Yeah.
So, some people refer to me as a Christian. Some people don't. Some people think I'm a bully. Some people think I'm a defender from bullies. It just, all of this stuff happens when you get out here in this whole influencer space that I never really wanted to get into. But I don't like it because, like, Christian influencers are like the new televangelists. Wow. When you think about it, like, that's where we spend most of our time now. Like, growing up, TV was where we spent most of our time. That was our mass media. Yeah. We would watch movies, shows, news, music videos, everything.
Sports, everything you needed was there. Yeah, you're right.
Now we do all of that on our phone.
Wow.
So the people who are getting your attention on your phone have the most influence. And I'm going to tell you the worst part about Christian influencer culture. Too many people are building or forming their faith off of sound bites. You cannot form your faith on theological sound bites. You can't do it. You can't do it. I don't care how many 60-second reels you watch. You are going to have to go deeper at some point, or you're just going to run into a brick wall. Like, I talk to people all the time. We have a digital community in Patreon where we do a lot of that work. Like, we have classes and we have a community of people where we ask questions and exchange resources, and I do live streams and we do that type of stuff where, like, I answer questions and we work through stuff together. And there's always somebody, like, every few weeks who says something like, I'm so glad I finally joined because I've learned so much since I got here. Like, I've grown so much. Somebody joined our community and said, I have grown more here in 6 months of community with y'all than I did in my prior 10 years of deconstructing in isolation. Because there is something to being in conversation with people. There's something to the exchange of ideas. Yeah. Rather than what we're accustomed to in church is having a preacher talk at us. So we really, like, have to decentralize some of the exchange of communication that we have, because everything traditionally has come from the top down, the preacher to the pew, the pulpit to the pew. Yeah. And what we try to do in our space is decentralize that, and we just sitting together at a table and all having a conversation together. Yeah. That allows people to engage their faith in more meaningful ways than the influencer hitting you with a 60-second reel or, just showing a sermon. Yeah. It's like, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's ask the tough questions. Yeah. Ask the tough questions and let's be real about it.
Yes, sir. On socials, to your point, I see people posting, especially here in Atlanta, I'm going to this mega church, that church, parking lot's full, people are packed. Do you feel like people are showing up for the brand or showing up truly for God? How do you feel about this current era right now?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think brand goes a long way. And people flock to what's popular. That's just the thing. It's like, oh, that's the hottest thing going on. Well, I need to go over here and see what all the hype is about. So that's just normal. And I don't knock it. I mean, my background is in marketing. and business development.
Mm.
So I don't knock branding. Like the platform that we have,
Mm-hmm.
I had to put marketing expertise into that. I had
Right.
to put branding expertise into
Mm.
that. But yeah, like I think the problem is we are too impressed with the spectacle of it all, and we don't interrogate the substance.
Mm.
That's the problem. So we listen to what people say on the surface,
Yeah.
and we're drawn in by the amazing music and all of the hype and the passion. And then we miss what lies underneath, what grounds all of this. What's the ultimate agenda in the earth? What's the ultimate agenda in the earth? Because, you know, a lot of times in church say the agenda is heaven, but heaven can take care of itself. Talk to me about how we living right here.
Come on, Pastor. What dangers potentially could these young folks face by being in these mega churches now? Because I would say like my age group of like late 20s was that group that started to walk away from the church and, you know, try to learn like different things, concepts. But now these babies are young because of those influencers, to your point of showing up now at the big churches, things like that. What type of disappointments could they face? Just dangers overall from being in those type of environments.
I got a whole community of people who can tell you about what type of dangers and
Yeah.
concerns they should have. There's a saying that my friend Autumn, we call her Rich Auntie, she started it on the podcast. She says, "Such was I."
Mm.
That's her statement, because we're always talking about the impacts of indoctrination.
Wow.
On how we move throughout the world, how we suppress ourselves, how we interact with people based on that indoctrination. So we're always having these conversations, and she'll always say, "I have grace because such was I."
Wow.
She'll always say, like, "I'm glad that I wasn't in that place in my life when social media is what it is, because I would have been one of these people out here crashing out, talking about everything is demonic and don't go see sinners, because there's
people saying don't go see sinners, right? Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Like, so you live with a lot of regret when you give up yourself like that, because whenever you come back to yourself, you're gonna ask yourself, why? What the hell was I doing? Yeah. What did I do with all of that time where I could have been living my life on my own terms? Sure, with the guidance of a spiritual community, with the guidance of a pastor, but still on my own terms, so that I have the autonomy and the agency to even disagree with my pastor or my faith community if I should decide. But in these, like, you know, fundamentalist spaces, you don't get the space to disagree with the pastor or the faith leader, because they are the voice of God. Wow. That's how they brand themselves, as the voice of God. I'm just telling you what God said. And then that takes away your autonomy and your agency. So yeah, regret is the thing that I think people will deal with the most.
Yeah. Autonomy, agency. What does living life to its fullest potential, but also being a Christian, a believer, look like in 2025?
So my whole ministry is built on the theological foundation of the greatest commandment, right? When I went to seminary and had all of these holes poked in my embedded theology, all of these things that I believe were true, only to discover, like, oh, it's actually not like that. You know, I went through all of that. I think it was Mark Twain that said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And I went through that in seminary and started thinking about, like, okay, I thought I knew a bunch of stuff that I really don't know. And now I'm, coming into a deeper understanding. So what does that look like in practical terms as it applies to how I live out my faith? And I knew I could not continue to practice the basic components of the theology that I was given. And I started, looking in the Bible, because I was a seminary student. I was like, is there anything else in here redemptive? Like, can I redeem, the spirituality that I've built over these past 20 something years of my life? And I landed on the greatest commandment in Matthew chapter 22, where an attorney asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in all of the law? And Jesus said, love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Then he says, everything in the law and everything in the prophets hinges on these two. So love God with your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself come as a package deal. Everything hinges on those two. And as I started to really unpack that, because I was like, okay, if we supposed to be like Jesus and we supposed to follow his way, he's saying this is the most important thing. This is what he said. He said, love God. And the second part is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. That is a package deal. One is not more important than the other. Love God is not more important than love your neighbor as yourself. Because that word like, the second part is like it. That word in the original language of the New Testament, it means of equal rank. So he's saying love God, and of equal rank, love your neighbor as yourself. So you can't love God if you don't love your neighbor. And you can't love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. And when I realized that love your neighbor as yourself, the as yourself part was the part that we never talked about growing up. Nobody ever said it's important for you to love yourself. God wants you to love yourself. That's the greatest commandment in the faith. You can't live for God if you don't love yourself. Nobody ever told me that. So when I saw that sitting there staring me in the face, I was like, well, then I need to start really digging into what it means for me to love myself. And that's what I help people do. And that's what I think it means to live an abundant life in 2025 and still honor your moral compass and what you believe about God and what you believe about the world, is that you learn how to love yourself. It was the great Howard Thurman that said, don't ask yourself, what does the world need? But ask yourself, what makes you come alive? Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And to me, that's one of the greatest expressions of self-love. What makes you come alive? Do that. Do that without harming other people. That's all. Do that without condemning other people for how they live their personal lives, without imposing your beliefs on other people. If you got beliefs, just believe them and live them, but don't do it at the detriment of other people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Come on, Pastor. Is there still space to have a pro-Black message in the church in this current era? How do you feel about that?
Absolutely, there's space to do that. Just look at the likes of Otis Moss III. Yeah. There's definitely a way. I mean, there will always be that, again, depending on how you look at me, some people say I'm out the church. Some people say I'm in the church. I am the Black church.
Come on.
I embody the Black church. That's right. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not.
Yeah.
I'm 41 years old. I was born into this. I'm a 5th generation Baptist preacher, and I'm blackety black as hell. So, there will always be space for that. I would like for that space to grow, Yeah. I would love to see that space grow. When you look at people like Freddie Haynes and Friendship West in Dallas, there are people who are like really doing that work of like pro-Blackness front lines. And there are a number of other Black Christian faith leaders, so many women, so many Black queer people who are like on the front lines for pro-Blackness from a church context. I wish I could just list out all the names right now, but I'm in that space, so I see them. They're doing that work. I'm in this interesting position where I am connecting with people that have completely disconnected from the church. So they see me and they think I'm the only person who comes from Black church who thinks like this. Like, no, I represent a remnant. There's more than me. They're just not out here in the spaces that I'm in right now. They're doing other things, occupying other spaces.
Hey, Elijah in the Bible, I thought about that, to your point. I got way more of you out there.
Absolutely.
Exactly, man. Why do you think that there is so many Black men that feel somewhat disillusioned by the Black church and they aren't going to the church anymore, participating in things like that?
Ooh. Why are Black men so disillusioned with the church? So just like on a gender neutral level, the era in which we live, like coming out of the age of information, the access to information that we have now, it puts more pressure on the church to substantiate its claims. Wow. So you have a lot of people who don't want to deal with church because of that. Because like now, if the preacher says something erroneous in the pulpit, the people in the pew can fact check them on the spot.
Sheesh. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
We got ChatGPT, you got Google.
Yeah. It wasn't like that growing up.
That's
we
right.
didn't have smartphones, right? We had that physical Bible in our hand, all reading those same verses, and the person with authority was sitting up there.
Wow.
Telling us how we were supposed to understand it. All right, so now it's not like that anymore. You got people who are getting a theological education online. They may or may not go to school, or they may follow somebody like Dan McClellan, who is a digital Bible scholar. Like he just does like Bible scholarship on his YouTube page every day. Right. So people are really digging into that type of stuff. So there's this distancing from the anti-intellectualism of it all. It's like, you want me to believe something that's really not believable. And I cannot subscribe to that. And that's like gender neutral.
Right.
What I'm seeing in my space, I won't speak to everything because I don't know why Black men are leaving other spaces, but I know why Black men don't engage in my space to the degree that I wish we would. Because in my Black community of faith, it's built on inclusion. It's built on equity. Right. And in the Black church for such a long time, Black straight men were centered in everything. Yeah. We just did a movie gathering in our ministry about the movie Rustin, about Bayard Rustin. Yeah. And, one of the issues with the March on Washington is that there were no women speaking. And like one of the ladies that was on the planning committee, like, yo, what's the deal? Like, we here too. We got something to say. And the argument was, well, we had agreed only the heads of the participating organizations are going to speak. Therein lies the problem. Why are all the heads men? Right? Yeah. So that was the church that a lot of us were born into. Yeah. Now we're in this space where like women have more authority. There's more equity. They're being honored. They're being seen. They are standing in pulpits across the nation and out preaching a lot of the men. They're pastoring churches. And men struggle with submitting to the leadership of a woman. They struggle with having to share space with a woman on an equal level because we are accustomed to women being subordinate to us. And again, I'm one generation removed from that.
It's crazy.
That's not
From the
not
old
like,
black man.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? That's not like way in
No,
the
it's not.
past.
It's not.
Yeah, like I was born before a woman could get a business loan. Like that's how recent it is. So now, you know, when you're accustomed to experiencing privilege, equity feels like oppression. So yeah, a lot of black men feel oppressed when they got to go into a place where equity now exists where it once didn't, and they were once privileged.
And Pastor, you're not lying. Growing up in the black church, I remember we had one particular deacon, and anytime a woman would be in the pulpit or preaching, he would sit in the back hallway because he said he could not be inside if a woman is standing up preaching, and he didn't support it. And to your point, I'm only 28. So this was maybe like 20 years ago.
That's what I'm saying.
That's crazy.
Bro,
right
it's
around
a
the
real
corner.
thing.
Wow.
I preached in San Francisco in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm from the Bay Area,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people in the South think, you know, the Bay Area is just, or California
Progressive.
is just so progressive.
Yeah.
2015, I was preaching at this church out there, and the pastor came into the back study while I was, you know, just kind of like looking over my message. And he said, all right, before we go out into the sanctuary, I need to let you know there are women in the pulpit.
Okay.
I was like, all right, like why, like, tell me why you felt compelled to share that with me.
Right.
He said, well, that's a big deal around here. Like, these preachers around here do not believe in women preachers. And I've had people in this area like cut off relationship with me because of women preachers in my church. Like, that's real. Now, compare that to how I grew up. My dad was licensing women to preach back in the 80s when I was born. So there was already this disruptive gene in me, like from the jump. But yeah, it's a thing.
Man, foolishness. Again, back to Sinners. I know it just caught my mind. It's crazy filming. But in that film, in the juke joint, right, of seeing how spiritual our people were, right, that they could share crop all day, pick cotton, and still make time to come together as one, celebrate, have fun. And in that scene, you know, of seeing flashbacks from Africa, from the past to the present to the future with rock and roll, hip hop, what do you think makes Black people so spiritual as a people?
That's a good question. And I believe when you just go back to our roots, our connection to the earth. Like I'm in a period of my life now where I'm trying to reconnect to the earth.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I was born into a space where, you know, everything was industrialized, high tech, you know, and the tech just continues to increase more and more and more to make everything more convenient and disconnects us from the earth even more. But when you think about where we come from, it was us and the earth. And that's where a lot of our healing practices come from, our relationship with the earth. I have the most intense spiritual moments near water. Like at the beach, I feel the spirit. And by myself, just at the water, I feel that our connection to the earth, I believe, is at the core of it. And then also our connection to community. We're a communal people.
Yeah.
And spirituality is not just an isolated practice, it's also a communal practice. So that's our heritage. That's our ancestry. That's who we were as an indigenous people. And we're still that today.
Yes, sir. Man, that's a powerful answer. Carmelo Anthony, that case, you know, seeing how polarizing it is, right, Pastor, of seeing, you know, certain Black people in agreement, most white people not agreeing with it. Why do you think for Black Christians, when it comes to defending Black bodies, it makes some of us so uncomfortable for actually standing up for, like what you said, loving ourselves enough to fight back?
So many different reasons. Like one of which is not safe for a lot of people. They don't feel safe to defend themselves. The louder you are, the more disruptive you are, the more you're in danger. A lot of Black people, their whole livelihood is built on respectability.
Wow.
I was talking to a friend recently,
Mm-hmm.
and he came to me and was like, "Man, I'm coming because I trust you, and I just want to be real. There's not many people I can be real with. I know you're not gonna judge me." And he said, "Man, I'm gonna just be honest. I did this in church. I did this in church. I did this with a religious nonprofit. I did this. I'm a pastor. I did this with this other religious group." He said, "I'm tired of being a professional Christian."
Wow.
Where like my whole livelihood is tied to me being a Christian. And if I act outside of what the greater Christian community thinks is proper Christianity, there goes my livelihood.
Wow.
There are a lot of Black people who live like that. Like their livelihood is tied to the respectability politics of being dependent on white people, being dependent on systems that just extract labor from them. So that's just like one component of it. I'm sure there are so many, but yeah.
Man, as a Black pastor during these times, hearing you talk about there's so much craziness going on, how do you try to, I don't want to say cope, but try to find peace with everything, all the wildness that goes on, with you still having a close relationship with God? How do you still try to maintain some type of peace during this time?
That's an interesting question because peace is so important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do I maintain it is a daily practice,
Mm-hmm.
and it shifts from day to day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So yesterday, the way I prioritize my peace, I got a lot of travel coming up, and I got a lot of things on my plate. A lot of things on my plate right now. And I was feeling some of the stress of having too much stuff on my plate. So I looked at everything I want to try to get done before this week is over. And I started looking at all the stuff. Like I listed it out, all of these things. And I said, you know what? That's too much for any one person to do. And I had to come to the painful realization that I needed to pause my business operations on my clothing business, which has been my baby for 12 years. But in order for me to prioritize my peace, I needed to say no to something. I needed to let go of something that I care about.
Wow.
Sometimes prioritizing your peace means saying no to stuff that you care about for the sake of your own mental health, your own emotional health. Like, I got to say no to that thing because I'm a finite individual.
Yeah.
That also helps me maintain my peace. I can't do it all. I shouldn't even put that expectation on myself to do it all. So yeah, there are a number of ways I try to prioritize my peace, but one of them is just by managing my capacity and not putting too much on myself.
I love that. Right now, again, crazy times, foolishness going on. I already know when you saw lock the doors. How did you feel about Marvin Sapp? Because, man, seeing that, I'm like, oh, yeah, hey, that's pretty normal at church. But how did you feel when you saw that as a pastor?
So when I first saw it, I just like kind of rolled my eyes like, church stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever. And And then I saw how the culture responded, and people started sharing their experiences with those types of tactics.
Yeah.
Because the close the doors is a church tactic, right?
Yep.
And many people will come up with many reasons and origins for that particular practice. And that's really not the point.
Yeah.
Right? Because people will talk all day in defense of what he did by talking about the intent while ignoring the impact. And I think that's what was lost in this whole conversation. And this is what happens a lot of times, even in personal relationships. We judge ourselves based on our intent, and then we judge others based on their impact.
Wow.
So because his intent may not have been to make people feel trapped, that doesn't change the reality that tactic makes people feel trapped.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish there would have been some acknowledgement of all of these lived experiences of people who have dealt with financial manipulation and financial trauma in the church, and how they were triggered when they saw that, because they've been in situations where close the doors was stated. And we know what that's another thing that pissed me off. We know what that means. We know that means we not leaving here until we raise this money. Like, why are we acting like that's not the unspoken understanding?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, it's just about safety. No, nigga, it's not just about safety.
Wow.
And I get it. I understand the safety component, but let's not act like we don't know as lifelong church kids that close the doors, we all gonna leave together, we about to raise this offering, doesn't actually mean we not leaving until we raise the offering. So now if you get up and you leave, now you're going to get hit with the shame of the whole congregation looking at you because you didn't submit to the governing authorities.
Wow.
It's about control at the end of the day.
Man, submit to the governing authorities. That connects with what we even started off with. Are Christians supposed to submit to authority, Pastor Kristian? And who is this authoritative figure? That's the part I'm trying to get to. Who are the people that's in control?
I believe in reciprocal relationships. I believe you should do right by the people that do right by you. And when we gather together in large groups, there will always be leadership. Groups of people need leaders.
Right.
That doesn't change. So there is a certain authority that comes with leadership that is bestowed by the people. And the authority should be granted based on how the person handles the authority.
Wow.
So reciprocal relationships. If the authority does right by you, do right by the authority. And if not, you don't have an obligation to do right by them. So it's a case-by-case basis. Like, do you feel like the authority is doing right by you? Then, all right, do right by them.
Yeah.
But you have to decide that, right? Nobody can decide that for you.
Autonomy to your point.
You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
So like when people are, arguing with me about their belief system, I'm like, if that's what you believe, then just live it.
Wow.
You ain't got to convince me. Ain't no need to convince me. That's your life.
Wow.
You live in the life. So if you believe it, then just live it. But something tells me you're really not at peace with how this situation is going. Like, you actually have an issue with the authorities in your life because they are restricting your ability to live freely. But since you don't have the courage to address them, you misdirect that anger to people who call it out.
Wow. Man, Pastor Kristian, bro, you gave us an hour plus of free game, man. You killed this conversation. Very last question. What does deconstructing Christianity but still maintaining a relationship with God look like to you?
It looks so many different ways. For me, it looked like starting a community of faith for Christians and non-Christians and agnostics and atheists and whoever wants to be a part of it, as long as we all agree to love our neighbors as ourselves.
Wow.
Right? So my faith is rooted in the greatest commandment, and I still view the Bible as sacred, but not sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
I engage it critically. I push back. I receive wisdom from it. I critique it. I am taught by it. I reject it. Like all of these, I have a very complex relationship with the Bible based on what I'm reading in the context of what I'm reading. So like, that's what it looked like for me. For somebody else, it might be walking away from anything associated with Christianity altogether. But you still know you got that personal connection to a divine source that is beyond you. Wow. And I always encourage people in that instance to like make sure you are a part of a community that feeds you spiritually, even if it's not a church. Because again, when you take this path, it's about developing your own agency and autonomy. So you get to decide what nurtures you spiritually. Because see, the church told you Sunday morning is what nurtures you spiritually. Wow. And the reality is a lot of people weren't nurtured on Sunday morning. So now as you deconstruct and you feel a connection to the divine yet instilled, now you have to answer for yourself. What nourishes me spiritually, and how will I invest my time into that for my own spiritual benefit? Oof. So it might be a hiking group. Right. It might be a book club. It might be a digital community like mine. It might be a hoodoo collective. Whatever it is, right? You have to make that determination. It might be a paint group. It might be a fitness class. You know, you decide what that is.
Man. Also, I do have to probably ask this one question with Thomas. Yes, for sure. In Sinners with the pastor, how did you feel about him as well? Because I have to ask you about that as a pastor.
I mean, that was really art imitating life. That was real. Like, we all who grew up in church at some point heard pastors talk about the musicians playing in the club. Yeah,
devil's music.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It may not have been your own pastor, but we've heard pastors say that has been an ongoing theme in the Black church for as long as I can remember. Wow. So that was true to the culture, this separation of sacred and secular that really is not African. That's European. Wow. We got that from whiteness, this separation of the sacred and the secular. Man. Because our indigenous spiritual practices were not tied to a building. We were spiritual everywhere we went. We took that spirit with us. And where 2 or 3 were gathered, there was the presence of that spirit, which is why today, when you go into a club or a concert, there's probably going to be some church had at some point. Like there's going to be some type of spirit that arises in that place that feels like Sunday morning because we carry that spirit with us everywhere we go. Man. But we were taught through colonized Christianity that the sacred and the secular had to be separated instead of fluidly working together. And I believe that's what the pastor represented in the movie.
Microphone on fire, man. Pastor Kristian, thank you. Where can everybody follow you? The Patreon, all that good stuff.
Yeah, go to thefaithcommunity.org if you just want like our link tree, thefaithcommunity.org. But we post a lot of like long form content on YouTube at tfc.virtual.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can find me on all the well, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Facebook, and then the TFC virtual YouTube page.
Let's go, man.
Yeah, holla at us.
Yo, Pastor Kristian, man, thank you for blessing our platform once again. That was truly a phenomenal conversation, man. Y'all make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow him, ask questions, debate if you want in the comments as well. All forms of conversation are always welcome over here on this side. So, man, we appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Blessed be your host, Caleb Smith. Until next time, peace.